So the Parashat this week, Emor, is a continuation really of last week, the Holiness Code, and it really serves to kind of ratify the alternative name of the book of Leviticus in the rabbinic sources, which is Torah Kohanim. Right, so which you might think means the Torah of the Kohanim, but the word Torah really means like the instruction manual, and in modern Hebrew, like it's still sometimes used that way. Like you might ask, well, all right, so teach me how to cook, right? So you might say, teach me Torah habishul, right? The Torah of cooking. There's all kinds of laws around cooking too, but that's not what it means, right? It means like how to cook. Okay, so if you go to a kosher restaurant or a bakery, not so much around here, but let's say in Baltimore, right, which is a more right-wing Orthodox community than Silver Spring or Kent Mill, right, which are modern Orthodox. Or if you go in Brooklyn or, someplace like that, or if you buy kosher baked goods from like a Jewish brand, right? Like not Oreos or Pepperidge Farm, but like, I don't know, Green's Babka or something like that. It might say on the package that it's made from yashan flour. Okay, yashan literally means old. Okay, now, I don't know about you, but I'm not necessarily looking for something that's made from old flour, right? So what is this business of yashan flour? Okay, so in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 14, which is in the context of all of the holidays, and if we do the Torah reading, you'll see we won't actually read this verse because we'll come in the middle of the holidays, but you have this verse. You must not eat any bread or roasted or new grain until the very day you bring the offering to your God. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come wherever you live. Okay, so no bread or roasted or new grain until the day that you bring the offering, which is Shavuot. Okay, so what does this mean? All right, so there are 5 types of grain. Okay, and we this is important for like Pesach too, right? Most matzah's made out of wheat, right? But if you're gluten-free, right, there's also oat matzah, right? Because oats don't have gluten, but there are 5 types of grain: wheat, oats, barley, spelt, and rye. Okay, so what is special about these 5 types of grain in terms of like halacha? All right, so these are the 5 types of grain that can be made into matzah, right? So if you go to the store and like Manischewitz makes gluten-free matzah style squares, right? And they're very careful not to say that these things are matzah, right? Because they're not made out of grain. I mean, I don't know, tapioca starch and some, they're actually not too bad, but they're not matzah, right? Because they're not made out of these 5 types of grain. Similarly, challah, right? You can eat cornbread or whatever, but it's not challah. You can't say hamotzi on it, right? And I remember one time we had a program and we had a dinner, but like the bread was cornbread. So I had but then I found out that wasn't really corn. The cornbread wasn't made out of corn only. There was also, so you have to, right? So what is the blessing, right? So these are also the same type of grains that can become chametz, right? So wheat, oats, barley, spelt, and rye, really, really important. So the verse that I read means that if grain is planted, that is, say, these 5 species, or takes root less than 2 weeks before the 16th of Nisan, okay, so it's planted or takes root less than 2 weeks before the counting of the Omer, it's considered hadash, new grain, which is the opposite of, I know this is confusing, right? Until the 18th of Nisan the following year. Okay, so planted like right before Pesach, you can't eat it until next Pesach, okay? If you observe this Yashan business, okay? Now, nobody actually requires to observe this, right? Because there's all kind of doubts. Some people say it only applies in Israel. Some people say it doesn't even apply in Israel because it only applies when the temple is standing, whatever. So, like, no certifying agency requires this Yashan business, but some people follow it. And so the agency will label it Yashan if it's actually Yashan. Okay. And so the Yashan means old, Hadash means new. Okay. Now, why am I bothering you with all this stuff, right? We don't observe it, right? None of us observe it. I mean, I'm happy we keep kosher, right? But there's a statement in the Talmud, Hadash Asur min HaTorah. Okay, Hadash is forbidden by the Torah. Okay, in its original context, it means new grain is forbidden by the Torah. But about 200 years ago, there was a rabbi known as the Chatam Sofer, and he used this verse homiletically, and he said, because that's a way to read it. It's not what it actually meant, but it's a way to read it. Hadash Asur min HaTorah means what? Anything new is forbidden by the Torah, right? Anything new is forbidden by the Torah. And so the Hatam Sofer is in Central Europe, and this is when Reform Judaism is starting, right? And remember, conservative Judaism is a split off from Reform, right? So he said anything new is forbidden by the Torah, right? So rabbis, and even like Orthodox rabbis, because they wanted to stay relevant to their congregations. So Orthodox rabbis wanted to give sermons in German. He said, no. Why not? Anything new is forbidden by the Torah, right? So they wanted to move the reading desk to the front of the shul, right? Like it's done in churches. And remember, in Catholic churches until Vatican II, the priest faced away from the congregation. So nobody thought it was weird or uncivilized to have, but so they wanted to move the reading desk. And he said, no, can't move the reading desk. Why? Anything new is forbidden by the Torah, right? And so this is the real origin of ultra-Orthodoxy, right? Which, like, and again, I mean, I know ultra-Orthodox Jews claim and probably actually believe that they're living identically to the way Jews have always lived, right? So Moses wore a long black coat and a big black hat and spoke Yiddish, right? But, you know, the minute you're like introducing, I have to be careful to not allow anything to change, that's not the same as what went before, because you had changed, right? So there's a book called Iturei Torah that I read sometimes, especially for like sermon materials, because it's a gathering of like little, like one paragraph vignettes, mostly from Hasidic sources, but not exclusively, on each parsha. And so there's a story for this parsha that, okay, so Rav Kook, Abraham Isaac Kook, was the first chief rabbi of Palestine, really. It was the British mandate for Palestine, and he was the chief rabbi. And somebody went to his office and they complained and they said, you have an office, you have a secretary, you have a telephone. How dare you have an office, a secretary, and a telephone? Why can't I have an office, a secretary, and a telephone? Hadash asur min haTorah, right? Anything new is forbidden by the Torah, right? Did our holy ancestors have offices and secretaries and telephones? No. Okay, so you're transgressing this verse. Hadash asur min haTorah. And Rav Kook says, I have a different interpretation of that verse. What's your interpretation? You're not allowed to eat new grain until the time that the Omer was brought, right? So in other words, he understood that verse to mean what the verse actually means, right? But this instinctive reaction against innovation, right? It's not only in ultra-Orthodox. It's not, okay? And if you read articles about change management in religious institutions, it's very, very difficult, right? And I understand it, right? Because we are living in a world of rapid change, right? All right, that's a good question. 6 years ago, who here heard of Zoom? Zoom. Anybody? I did, because I was using it already, because I had some of my classes, not exclusively on Zoom, but like Michael Zapor wanted to be on some of my classes. He lives, you know, an hour away in each direction. He wasn't going. So I learned about Zoom. Right. 6 years ago, nobody else had even heard of it, right? Can't live without it today. Can't live without it, right? I mean, I remember I was telling a story. My dad, he worked for a company that made men's sleepwear. And he was director of operations or VP of operations, and he decided back in the 70s that they needed a computer. Okay, and they had their first computer. I remember because I went in and saw it. It was a Wang computer, and it was massive. All right, it took up a room probably half the size of this sanctuary. Massive, and had to be cooled to 68 degrees, right? And had to be like, special air filters, germ-free, et cetera, right? I don't know for a fact, but I'm guessing that that massive computer had less power than the smartphones we all walk around, right? So we're living in a world where everything is changing all the time. So people don't want their shul to change, right? Or their church, or their mosque, right? And I can tell you, because I've had these discussions, that, should I give my sermon in Arabic or in English? Right? And the old folks say, Arabic. How dare you speak English? Did Muhammad speak English? Right? But the Imam says, well, I'm not going to reach the young people with a sermon in Arabic that they don't even understand, right? So they have exactly the same issues. In fact, I remember, it's just coming back to me, when I was in York, Pennsylvania, and I was friendly with so they didn't have an imam, but I was friendly with the person who was the lay leader of the Muslim community. And he was an engineer from Pakistan, and he came to me one day. He was very, very upset. He wanted advice. What's the problem? My granddaughter wants to date, and she doesn't want to ask me to approve the guy she dates before she goes out. What can I do? I said, move back to Pakistan. That's the only thing you can do. Right. Of course, I won't even go there. All right. So resistance to change is real, and there's a reason for it. Doesn't mean I won't fight that resistance, okay? But I understand that resistance. I remember one time when I was in Norwich, where Stu is from. In fact, Stu knows this woman. I was preparing her son for his bar mitzvah, and we were using this computer program called Trope Trainer, which some of you may be familiar. I use it this day. If you see like my printouts of the Torah portion every week, right? This is from Trope Trainer. So, he learned how to read the Haftorah using Trope Trainer, and he learned it well. But after his bar mitzvah, his mother came to me, and she was really angry about the way that I had prepared her son for his bar mitzvah. I said, what's the problem? She said, well, you use this computer program. When I was preparing for my bat mitzvah, we used cassette tapes. And I'm like, I'm not often at a loss for words, but I was at a loss for words. And it was only after she left that I thought, so was your father upset that you used cassette tapes because he used 78 records? There's nothing in the Torah that tells us that we have to use cassette tapes to teach a kid for his bar mitzvah, which is a good thing. Because, when's the last time you saw a cassette tape, right? And I don't know, maybe you got a pile of junk around your house, right? Okay, you probably threw out a lot of cassette tape when you moved, right? What? You have them. When's the last time you actually listened to them, right? No, right? So, right, everything is changing, right? So, I mean, this was a little over the top, but I understood it, right? So, you know, on the other hand, there are people who want to embrace change all the time, right? They want like the newest thing, the newest thing, the newest thing all the time, right? So we have two like opposite tendencies. One is extreme resistance to change, and one is a desire for innovation for innovation's sake, right? And so, look, I mean, things are changing, right? Things are changing, and things are going to change for us really significantly, right? And God willing, fairly soon, right? And it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard, and you know we have to decide like what they call in the Talmud Yehareg va'al ya'avor. Okay, allow yourself to be killed rather than transgress. Right? Okay, what is a Yehareg va'al ya'avor? I think having the Yortzeit plaques in our new location, that's pretty close to a Yehareg va'al ya'avor. Right? Having every single piece of art from the sanctuary, desirable, not Yehareg va'al ya'avor, right? I mean, in other words, I think we would all like our new space to remind us of this space, right? But it's not going to be identical to this space, right? It's just not, and things change. Okay. On the other hand, I also want us to resist the idea of getting rid of everything of the past because, only the new, right, will only attract people with innovation, right? Not necessarily true, right? So we're not in a position to say anything new is forbidden by the Torah, no change at all, right? But I also think we shouldn't just like throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks, right? So to me, right, there are two questions. There are two fundamental questions, right? Is what you are proposing contrary to Jewish law as we understand it, right? If it is, as far as I'm concerned, that's the end of the discussion, right? I'll give you an example. We just had this discussion, right? A lot of our people don't drive, right? Or they're not comfortable driving long distances. Can we have a van to pick people up, right? And I guarantee you, if this question was raised in a larger forum, I guess I just did, but it's not that large a forum, right? Somebody's going to say, absolutely not, that's forbidden. Well, question, all right? Well, three of you were in this discussion, so those of you who were not in this discussion, You think it's allowed to have a van to pick people up and bring them to Shabbat service? Allowed or not?
Well, whether it's allowed or not, it's here.
Good idea, but if it's not allowed, we can't do it, okay? We're a conservative synagogue, we have to follow certain laws.
Well, I think it would be, because if you're just picking it up, bringing it back here, how's that different from you driving?
It's not well, because, look, there's a strong argument to be made that the decision that allowed people to drive to shul was an erroneous decision, okay, but rapid, okay? What's the difference? The difference is you're hiring somebody to do it, and you're not, I mean, you know, raise the question of the security guard, but you could argue that that's potentially, you know, equal out that edge, right? But you can't, normally you cannot hire somebody to specifically work for you on Shabbat, right? So that's a problem. The answer is, it's allowed, okay? I mean, it's allowed. I don't know how, again, how many of you have ever been in Israel? You've been in Israel. Stay in a hotel in Israel over Shabbat. They had a Shabbat elevator. They did. They definitely did. You may not have noticed it because it may not have mattered to you. Ah, okay, well, all right, but a lot of places, and also like, you know, on the Upper West Side building, right? They have a Shabbat elevator, okay? What is a Shabbat elevator? Right, it stops at every floor or every second floor, up and down automatically, right? Automatically. If you have a van, and here you have, there's two things. The driver has to be not Jewish, okay, which is like not exactly a problem. I mean, I don't know how many bus drivers are here. I'm sure there are some, but not many. Right, so the driver has to not be Jewish, and you have to instruct the driver, stop at every stop, whether there's somebody there or not. Why is that important? Because then they're not stopping specifically for you, right? And if the driver stops at every stop, whether there's somebody there or not, it's no different than a Shabbat elevator. And it's allowed, okay, but yes, I agree with you. I think it's a good idea, right? But it's a good idea only if we can do it within the bounds of halacha as we understand it. So again, so these are the two extremes, right? I mean, I guarantee you can't do that. You can't do that. It's forbidden, right? And then there are going to be other people who say, let's just do it forbidden or not, right? To me, I don't like either of those, right? I mean, again, no criticism intended of you, because people could say that I did the same thing at the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, with allowing services on Zoom, even though at the time the conservative movement said no, right? But I want to get, I thought it was okay, even though the official position was no. But you know, so that's where we have to be. We have to figure out what works for us and what works for us within the bounds of Jewish law. And it should be as familiar as possible, I think, but not at the expense of viability in one way or another. So, it's gonna be a hard road, but I have no doubt we can do it. I have no doubt we can do it, but like I say, we have to avoid, the extreme mindsets, and we have to respect each other even where we disagree. All right, Shabbat Shalom.